Tonight's guest is a licensed psychologist, author, and keynote speaker. His TED Talk, Why We All Need to Practice Emotional First Aid, has been viewed over 5 million times. In his latest book, How to Fix a Broken Heart, he focuses on 2 types of emotional pain that are often marginalized: romantic heartbreak and the heartbreak that results from the loss of a cherished pet, and reveals how these 2 grief experiences impact our brain and our behavior and the steps we can take to take control of our lives, heal, and move on. Please join me in welcoming to LFPL psychologist Guy Winch, being interviewed by WHAS 11 news anchor Lisa Hudson.
Hello, everyone. Hello. Oh, having a little mic trouble back there, trying to get everything figured out here. Well, welcome. So glad you joined us tonight. I'm Lisa Hudson. I just started at WHAS a little bit ago, maybe a little over a month, so you may know me from there. And of course, this is Guy Winch. So,
hello, everyone.
We were just sitting back there chit-chatting about his book, How to Fix a Broken Heart. If you've seen, has anyone seen Guy's TED Talks that he's done? A few have seen them? So very interesting. I know I was just telling you backstage, I saw your TED Talks probably maybe a little over a year ago or so, just kind of listening to him driving to work, and found it so interesting because you did those talks about taking care of your emotional self and kind of doing that emotional first aid. And that kind of dovetails into this book, right? Tell me the difference between kind of what you were talking about there. Is this book just kind of a deeper version of your first TED Talk?
I think I see it more as a continuation, in the sense that what my books are about essentially are that we kind of take our emotional health for granted. We don't do anything for it. We wake up in the morning, we take vitamins for our physical health, we're very much aware. If we get a cut, for example, we're very good at telling the difference between, oh, this is a bandage will do, or I might need a stitch, or let's go to the ER very quickly. We're that good at diagnosing. We don't even know when we sustain an emotional injury. It doesn't even register as an injury. It's just something that makes us feel bad, and we go on with things. And so both of those 2 talks and the 2 books that are related to them, Emotional First Aid and How to Fix a Broken Heart, are saying, look, when we sustain a emotional or psychological injury, there are things going on in our head, in our body, that we can't ignore, that are going to impact our feelings, our thoughts, our behavior, that can fester and can really create problems if we don't take care of them. It's not just about, you know, squaring our shoulders and marching on. There are things we can do to ease the pain, to recover more quickly, to make sure things don't get worse. And so my books are about, here's the science, here's what we can do, let's start using these habits, let's start paying attention to our emotional health as much as we do to our physical health.
Yes, and I love the way that you speak about that in this book, specifically about things that maybe society doesn't see as a big enough problem. What I find so interesting about this book is that you really gravitate to 2 specific instances where, of course, if you lose a loved one, or if you go through a divorce, or if you have any of those kinds of heartbreaking moments, you talk about in the book how most people will say, oh no, I'm so sorry, kind of give you the room to grieve that and then get back on your feet. But in some instances, you don't really receive that. Is that kind of what you were speaking about?
That's exactly true. And so I decided to focus on 2 kinds of heartbreak that I think get very much the short end of the stick. And that is romantic heartbreak, where you are not married to the person, so it's not an official divorce, and the loss of a beloved pet. Because what we know from the science is that both of those kinds of incidents can cause very severe grief reactions, ones that can rival even the loss of a first-degree relative. So significant grief. And yet no one's going into work saying, I need a few days off, my cat died. No one's doing that. No one's going to work and saying, my girlfriend dumped me, that's why I'm crying at my desk. Because it's a girlfriend, just grow up.
Right.
I'm getting a divorce, that's more official, we'll give you some sympathy. So both these things, the breakup of a relationship short of a marriage and the loss of a beloved pet, cause extremely severe reactions in us, challenge us in every possible kind of way, yet they're not something that is approved, that's sanctioned, that, and on the other side of it, we don't know what to do when we just wait it out. Time will heal all. Time might heal some, but not that well necessarily, and definitely not all. And time is one factor we can use, but there are many others. We don't have to ignore those. So the idea is, let's be very proactive about how we manage our emotional health. Let's be very realistic about the fact that, yes, these are all kinds of things that can really damage people. So let's be more aware of them rather than marginalize them.
Yeah, and you speak about a woman in your book, one of your patients, and that's another interesting thing about this book. All of these people that are, the stories that you tell are patients of yours, right?
Yes, I've been in practice in New York City for 25 years. New York City is quite the melting pot, so I've worked with a variety of people from all over the world, every age and race and ethnicity, and I very much labor to change identifying information when I'm speaking about patients in the book. So you hopefully won't be able to tell who they are, or people in their lives won't be able to tell who they are. But they're all cases. These are all real things, because that's how I know about the depths of the emotion, the depths of the psychology that's going on. They were in therapy at the time.
And that's what's so interesting when you see real people going through real problems and then the kind of reaction that they had. You speak about one particular person in your book, Kathy, which her story really struck me, because Kathy was someone who had been through cancer twice, fought cancer twice, and it wasn't until she went through a romantic breakup, that breakup seemed to be harder on her than cancer. Is that possible? Can our hearts really hurt as much as a physical pain like that, like going through cancer treatments?
It's very, very possible. In fact, so here's an interesting study that people did. They asked for volunteers who had a recent heartbreak, and they wanted to gauge what happens in our brain, how comparable is emotional pain to physical pain. So they asked for these volunteers who had a recent heartbreak. In the first round, what they did is they looked at physical pain. First round, for some, these things are usually switched around so not to, so some got the physical at first, some the emotional. In the physical condition, they had a heat inducer attached to their forearm. And they started on a setting of 2 and ratcheted it up. And the highest they got was 8, on the scale of 1 to 10, where 10 was unbearable physical pain. 7-second exposure. So they got up to 8, and they wanted to see what happens in their brain at that setting. Then they were heartbroken. They asked them to bring a picture of the person who broke their heart. They put them in the functional MRI machines, which is a tube, right? Stuck the picture to the top of the tube and had them look at the picture and relive the breakup, which I have to say, the first thing I looked at in the study when I read it was, how much were they paid? Because really,
right? That's
not a $10 study if you ask me. Paid, I think, $150. But anyway, it's neither here nor there. And when they compared those brain scans, the 8 on a scale of 1 to 10 heat inducer on the forearm, and the looking at the picture, it really looked almost identical in the brain scans. And they actually concluded that the pathways for emotional pain in our brain piggyback on the pathways of physical pain. They are that identical. And so when you say, can emotional pain be as strong as physical pain? I would say no, I think it's worse. And if you asked most people, would you rather have a broken leg or a broken heart? I think most people, actually let me ask, broken leg or broken heart, who's for the leg?
Lots of legs. Lots of broken
most
legs.
of you. Of course, because the broken leg, it's very painful for a few moments, then it's over. The broken heart goes on and on and on. So yes, I think one is worse, in fact, than the other.
And what I thought was really interesting, too, about Kathy's case was she goes through cancer treatment. If you haven't read the book yet, no spoiler alerts, I'll try not to spoil it. But she goes through cancer twice, 2 rounds. Then she goes through this emotional breakup. And she goes through a part where all she can think about is this breakup. She's typical, if We've all been there, right? In the relationship, you have something breaks up, and then the next thing you know, well, your brain is just constantly going about, oh, I could have done this, maybe I should have done that, or maybe he did that, or maybe I did that. And she gets so caught up in this kind of rumination, right? Is that really what she's doing?
She's ruminating. For those who don't know what rumination means, rumination is to kind of obsess when you're really stewing and the same thoughts are running around in your head and you cannot stop thinking about it. She really ruminated about this breakup incessantly, day and night. It was all she could think about, and for many, many, many months. She really was stuck.
And then what I thought was really interesting too in her story, then she gets to the point where people stop caring, right? People stop. They're tired of hearing about it. Okay, you broke up with Brad. We know it was terrible. It was 6 months ago. Get over it, right? That's kind of the response she starts getting from her friends. And at first, you think, well, man, those are really terrible friends. But then, I know I've done it, sadly, to people, you know, that I love. If they have come to me with a problem and they keep coming to me with the same problem for months and years and years and years, and finally you just figure it out, right? You know?
Look, first of all, if it's years, good for you. You're an incredibly patient person. It's not years. It's not. And the thing is that it's an interesting thing because let's say somebody, you know, is a burn victim, you know, and they're getting their bandages changed regularly for, it can be a year, it can be 2. We're very sympathetic to the physical pain that they're in. You know, we don't stop at some point, well, you know, I've seen that bandage replaced, I don't care anymore. It's not how it works. But with emotional pain, our empathy has an expiration date. And that expiration date, it's an unconscious thing with us, is when we think you should be over it. Now, for whatever reason, for what timetable, it's very individual, we don't define it necessarily, but there's a moment in which we feel like, you should be over it, and then the empathy goes, and we start to feel resentment, and we fake it through the initial part of the resentment, but then it starts leaking out, and like, yeah, I heard already that story, or like, you keep saying that. And it's an interesting thing, because the person's still in pain, and we care about that person, but we lose our empathy. And again, this is this bias that we have, in which emotional pain doesn't register as significant as physical pain. Physical pain is legitimate. Emotional pain, just keep going, stop complaining.
Yeah, toughen up.
Right, and it's a very biased, you know, that word is loaded. It's an unfortunate favoritism that we show that really has no justification.
Yeah. Why do we do that? I mean, do you know exactly why we do that? And if there's a way that we can change that? Or?
So, look, we have a hierarchy of needs, right? Safety, food, shelter. People in countries that are war-torn don't read books about self-help and happiness, because I'll read books about how to duck in an air raid shelter. I'm not going to worry about my happiness when I'm trying to survive. So it's really not long, 100 years, however many decades, that most of the world doesn't have to worry about the surviving part. And then once our needs are met in terms of survival, in terms of food, in terms of shelter, in terms of the very basic physical needs, then we can start looking at the higher order needs, and that's when our emotions come into play. So it's a recent development that we have the time and the space to, and the freedom to actually just pay attention to our happiness, as it were, to our life satisfaction, to emotional processes inside us. It's pretty new, you know. I mean, no one, 150 years ago, no one was walking around going, are you happy? Like, really? There's consumption, there's, you know, plague, what do you mean, am I happy? So it's recent. And because it's recent, we are still catching up. We are still much more focused on, are you injured physically? I hope we will continue to catch up, but there is much catching up to be done.
And that's what I think is interesting as well, when you say, not only are we lose that empathy from people, but we lose that empathy for ourselves. If we lose a pet, or if we go through a breakup, there is probably a part in our brain that says, I need to get over this, I need to get back to work, I need this, why does this hurt as much as it does, right?
Look, that is especially true about losing pets. Because almost every single person I've worked with who lost a pet they were very, very close to. And so it was a very, people lose, goldfish. I'm sure it's not. But when it's a cat, it's a dog, it's a horse, it's a, whatever animal that you're very attached to. I said horse because I know where I am. It's not just here, but I'm saying. So what happens there, almost every single person who came said, this is going to sound silly, but, or I feel foolish, but. And so there was almost this apology, not almost, it was an apology about, I'm very upset about a mere animal. Now the fact that that animal slept with them in the bed for 20 years, and maybe a lot of other people didn't, that was a really primary relationship for them. Of course they're bereft, but they felt very apologetic. And if you think about romantic heartbreak, it's for the kids. Yes, if you're 16, of course you're heartbroken. But really at 46, grow up. And the thing about heartbreak romantically is that it hurts as much at 86 as it does at 16. And I've literally had patients at 86 sit in my office and go, wow, I remember when my heart was broken at 16, this is just as bad. And there's no reason it shouldn't be just as bad, because yes, it hurts just as much, if it's that, important, etc. So these are, but we don't think that way, so we always feel apologetic. And then imagine we're going through this very, very difficult thing, and we're adding on top a little sprinkle of like self-criticalness or self-loathing to boot, and that's just so unnecessary. It's bad enough.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And this book struck me especially just because, I'm sure if you've seen the promo, I lost my mother in 2016. And it was very sudden, and it was something that we weren't expecting. She had a massive heart attack and she passed away. And that was a situation where immediately I had that support. I had my husband, I had my family, I had all this support. And so I related in a sense to, there was a timetable, right? There's like this period where they think, okay, 2-3 months, okay, she's laughing again, she's making a joke, she's okay. When really what they didn't know was that I was, going home and, eating a bowl of ice cream and, crying and then going to bed and waking up and doing it all over again. But I had that type of support. So when you go through these two heartbreaks that you talk about, losing a pet and then losing a romantic relationship, if you lose that social support, like you said, two things most people think is going to heal a broken heart is time and friends or a social system. So if you don't have that social system, if you don't have that support, then really what are you doing? You're just kind of waiting it out, really. Is that kind of what most people, the option that they think they have to take?
Yes, and again, my concern is that we wait out most of our emotional injuries. Whether it's heartbreak, whether it's failure, whether it's loneliness. We don't typically think of our emotional health as something that needs to be monitored in a moment-by-moment basis. That the question we need to be asking ourselves very regularly is, how am I feeling now? So for example, I'm very, very sorry about your mother. And yes, 2 or 3 months is enough to be able to say, hey, I can put on a face and get distracted and fake it, but I'm a wreck at home. But the people, that are not at home are like, she's good. And the reality of these situations is that we have to ask ourselves, in this recovery, for example, week 1, you lose a parent. How am I feeling? How am I doing? What do I need? Week 6, month 3, when you lose a parent, how am I doing? Well, I'm okay in public. I can get through the day without obviously crying or without obviously doing something that people are like, oh. But I'm still in the stage of, that is exhausting, and then I get home and I'm exhausted, and then those defenses kind of crumble a bit, and then I'm a little bit of a mess. Now, yes, that is the sequence of recovery, right? First you can fake it, and then you can actually feel it. How long is correct here? You said for me it was 3 months before I could do the faking, but not the fully. We don't really know, as a society, we don't know, well, what's appropriate for that kind of grief. What's appropriate for heartbreak? And again, in the book I talk about the fact that I've worked with some people who, it took them a year to get over a 5-year relationship. And I've worked with some people, it took them a year to get over a 1-month relationship, because those relationships had different meanings for those people at those various points in their lives. And so it's very difficult to come up with a general timetable. The best we can do is ask ourselves, how am I doing? Am I doing better this week than 2 weeks ago, this month than 2 months ago? Is there a trend, and is the trend of improvement sufficient? And if there's no real trend, or it improved but then it didn't, then there's something not working. I need to do something differently. The way I'm thinking about it, the way I'm managing it, is not sufficient. And then what other tools do I have that I can employ?
So it's really just about being aware, that being mindful of what you're going through, knowing that it is something that you are dealing with emotionally, and then, like you said, tracking your progress as you're kind of coming out of it. What are things that we can do if we're going through these types of heartbreak that can, obviously we want it over in a second, like, is there like a drive-through heartbreak healer, you know, like what can we do there? Obviously we can't do that, but what can we do to just kind of push that process forward?
So a lot of that depends on the ways in which we were impacted. For example, in a romantic breakup, were you living with a person or not? If you were living with a person, that's going to be a much bigger disruption in your life, because you're going to have to reconstitute a lot of your life, separating the pronouns. It was we, now it's I. You know, you stop seeing those people because your ex didn't really get along with them. You stopped doing that because they didn't do that. You started doing this because they did this. What are you doing now that you're single again? Are you going back to the old things? Are you reclaiming the new ones? So there's a lot of rebuilding that we have to do. It's similar for in some people when they lose a pet. I speak in the book about this guy who lost a dog. He was very isolated because he worked from home, so he didn't have this office environment. He didn't have many friends. He didn't have any family left. And he would take his dog in Manhattan to the dog run twice a day. And he was known, as many pet owners are, as the father of the name of the dog. No one really knew his name, but Bova was the name of the dog in the book. It's the fake name. So Bova's dad. And one of his experiences that was really profound, that the day after Bova died, he decided to go for a walk. And no one spoke to him. No one stopped him. No one addressed him. He couldn't get 5 steps with Bova. Bova was a ham. Bova was one of those dogs that you can't ignore this dog. He was adorable. He was also he was really good about, I'm going to get a lot of attention now. Look at me. And it shocked him that he said, these are people who came up to me like twice a week, saw me and didn't say anything because I was without the dog. So it felt so isolating. It felt so alone. It felt like I've lost who I am. I'm no longer Bova's dad. He would sit in the dog run and chat with other dog owners. He lost all of that. So there's so many secondary losses that we sustain when we lose a pet, when we lose a relationship. And we're really focused on the primary loss of the love object of the animal. But there are many secondary losses which we don't pay attention to, which are actually really significant for our ability to recover.
So just being aware of knowing, and that's something that he didn't know until he starts walking through the park without Bova. And
right.
That's when he realizes, oh, this is something else.
Right, and I said to him, let's look at all the things that are going to change now that Bova's gone. And when he started thinking about it, he came up with a huge list, which he hadn't even considered, of things. He was very, very friendly with the people who ran the pet store. So when he would go in there, he would like stay there for half an hour and chat with them, and it was a very kind of ritualistic, friendly kind of, he lost that. I mean, there were just so many things that he didn't have anymore, and that he needed to figure out ways to rebuild, to work around, to fill.
And is that a good idea? When is it the time? Well, like we said, there's not really a timetable, but how do we know when we're ready to start feeling those voids, I guess, those little holes?
Grief is a shock at the beginning. Like, for example, your experience, it was unexpected. It's very, very shocking. We are literally, our head is spinning. There's very little we can do in the first hours, days, depending on, we're literally just getting through it. We're just this ball of pain. We're just, our whole, world is shaking. that's the first wave. But past that first wave, we need to start asking ourselves those questions. What do I need to do? So I would text my friend a picture of my dog every morning from the dog run, and I'm not doing that anymore. And so am I going to stay in touch with that friend that we would text each other the dog pictures? Or, you know, how do you start to fill the voids? What are the voids? And when you identify them, you need to start thinking about filling them. Now, are you ready yet? Maybe. I always say, don't wait until you feel totally ready, because you could probably do it before you feel totally ready. But start to consider, you know what, I haven't been to my bowling league night for a few weeks now since the breakup, because if they ask me, oh, where's the girlfriend, where's the boyfriend, I might start crying. Let me shoot everyone an email, say, look, I'm fine, I'm coming, if it's okay, I'd rather not talk about it. Or, if it's okay, I'd rather spend a few minutes talking about it, whatever your preference is. Again, there's no right and wrong in that. It's like it depends what you prefer, but let the people know, because people around the people who are grieving are often very like, oh, I don't know what to do, should I bring it up, should I not, it's been 3 weeks, do I say, how are you, with that subtext, or do I just say, hey, how are you? Like, you know, it's like people don't know what to do. So I always say, well, tell them. It would be helpful to talk about it. It would be helpful not to talk about it. And then go and resume as soon as you can.
Yeah, that's really good advice, too, because I find myself in that position. Even if I have experienced something that's similar, I try to think back, okay, what did I want people to do? And I didn't really know. It's kind of, you don't really know what you want anybody to do. You're so in your own head that you can't even really understand that anyone is trying to help yet. And then you get to the point where, okay, it is okay to talk about it, or it is. So that's a good advice for people that know someone that's going through a heartbreak. Then instead of sitting there in that awkward, ooh, what do I do? Just ask them, what do you need, right?
Right. And I ask people all the time, even in my office, because I'm a psychologist, but it's very individual. I can't assume, you know, in other words, somebody will come in and talk about a loss, and then they'll come in the next week, and I don't know if they're not talking about it because it's one of those things they're feeling silly to talk about. So I'll say to them, we spoke about this last week. You're not mentioning it. It's been 10 minutes. I'm sorry to interrupt, but you're not mentioning it. I just want to make sure that you're not mentioning it because you would rather talk about this, as opposed to you're not sure that I would be okay with talking about that, because I'm perfectly okay, let's talk about that. So let's give some thought to what you really feel is most emotionally urgent, and let's talk about that. And so a lot of times people will say, oh good, because I thought, you know, 2 sessions about my dog is too much, and I'm like, 20 is not too much,
right.
If that's what it takes.
If you need that much to talk about, then that's what they're there for, right?
Yes.
That's what you do. All right, and this was something interesting too, you said too, don't trust your instincts when you're heartbroken. That was hard for me. That was a hard one. I don't know if you guys have to deal with that. Because your instincts, some people have the instinct of, okay, well, I need to buck up. I need to get it together. What is it about our instincts that become skewed once we're heartbroken?
So this is the part that people have a hard time with, and I get a lot of objections in the form of questions. I have a question. You're wrong. Anyway, so...
Pretty much.
I have an answer, I'm right. Anyway, so, not always, but look, here's the thing, you know, about I'm sorry, that joke was my train of thought. Where were we?
Yeah, don't trust your instincts.
Yes, instincts. So our mind and us have different purposes when we're heartbroken. Our purpose, if it's romantic heartbreak, say, is to get over it so we can fall in love again and find the person. That's obviously our purpose. Our mind has an opposite purpose. Our mind is like, ooh, that was very, very painful. And since it was, the best way I can protect you is to make sure you never do that again. It's the hot stove principle. You know, when you touch a hot stove, hurts, your mind goes, I'm going to make you really nervous when you go near that stove again. And I'm going to keep reminding you that stoves are dangerous, and it's useful when it's a stove. It's not when you're heartbroken. So your mind's purpose is to keep shoving in images of the person who broke your heart, keep reminding you of how amazing they were in a very idealized, exaggerated way and keep the pain as fresh as it possibly can. That's what our mind will evolve to do. It's exactly what we don't need it to do. So at 3 in the morning, your mind will go, ooh, you should check their Instagram account, because remember they said that, like, and you're like, yes, I should do that. And like, no, you shouldn't do that. That's your mind saying, let's remember, and your goal is not. Mm-hmm. So it's really difficult, because we like to think, oh, my gut is telling me this. Your gut is right in certain situations. The barometer's off when you're heartbroken. Mm. So you have to know, and again, my guideline for this is, if your goal in moving forward is to diminish the presence of the person in your thoughts, right? Because that's recovery, you're thinking about them less and less and less and less and less. Then is this brilliant idea you had at 3 in the morning one that will diminish their presence in your thoughts or increase it? Mm. And if it's increase it, then don't do it.
Right. Don't send them the direct message on Facebook, even if it's been 10 years. It's about time.
If it were one message, that would be terrific. But, it's a barrage usually.
Yeah, that's never good. Okay. I'm trying to think. This was interesting. Before we get into questions, we're going to check with you guys and see what your questions are in just a second. But there's a piece in the book where you speak about companies, businesses that don't, like we say, they don't care that you lost your dog or that you broke up with your girlfriend or any of those things. Should that change? How do we as a society begin to embrace all types of emotional distress and then give it the healing time that it deserves, much like we do with physical pain? Can it happen? Is it even possible for our society to do that?
So I speak about this with business leaders and with company owners, and I try and make the point that if you're going to have an employee who's not at their desk every 10 minutes because they're crying in the toilet, or who is at their desk literally doing this at the keyboard, you're not getting a great day's work out of them. And the more you force them to do that, the longer it will take for them to be able to get back to their functioning. So if you have some kind of compassionate situation where you're like, if you need a couple of days, take them, with the understanding that you use them to get better so that when you come back, you can come back functional. Mm-hmm. I think that would be a return on investment of giving the employee those days and actually having them come back and more recovered. Mm-hmm. People say, well, they can take advantage of it. I'm like, really? And when they call in and say, I can't come into work today, are they not taking advantage of the sick leave? In other words, what's the difference? Mm. And here, if you see an employee, I say to people, sitting at their desk and they look really distressed, it's fair to say, are you okay? Mm-hmm. And if they say, I don't want to talk about it, say, that's fine, but are you able to do your job right now? Mm-hmm. In the same way, when you see an employee sitting at their desk and they look really ill, mm-hmm. you'd rather they went home. I really think it's the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I can definitely see that. And it's just getting companies and people to understand. And I guess it's just awareness for everybody, right? Once we all are kind of...
Yeah, that's a bit of a long road, I think. I mean, I'm trying very hard, but when I speak to people, I often get from these company owners and CEOs, I'll get an email a week later, hey, this just happened, somebody lost their dog, and I saw they were very upset, and I sent them home, and they were so grateful. And I'm like, I can't talk to everyone at once, and so I can get, some kind of traction with someone. I can sit and explain it, but it's a ways off before that becomes, I think, standard.
Yeah. All right. I'm trying to think. Let's see here. Maybe we have some questions we can take. Oh, there's one. If you want to go right back to that mic right there.
So I listened to you the other day on the mental illness happy hour. You were discussing the book, and you likened losing love to going through withdrawal. And I just recently broke up with my ex. I recently also told him to not see me for 6 months or to talk to me for 6 months just because I felt that I needed that distance. So what do you feel about... And when you lose a romantic relationship, is it better to go cold turkey, or is it better to maybe ease out of that transition a little bit?
Here's one of the things people found in the research, because I think this is an important preamble to my answer. When they looked again at brain scans of what's happening in our brain when we are withdrawing from romantic love, they found that it's very similar to what happens in the brain of heroin addicts when they're withdrawing from opioids, literally. That craving that we get for the person, that intense urge to seek them out, to contact them, to get, just to get it back, is very similar to what you see with heroin addicts withdrawing. Now, we always say to ourselves, why I'm acting so out of character. It's not like me to grovel. It's not like me to beg. It's not like me to do these desperation things. Most heroin addicts would say it's not like me to prostitute myself to get a drug, and they're doing that. So, but that's why, because there's this literal withdrawal that's happening in our brain. Now, we don't have methadone. We don't have a transitional substance. We don't have a transitional love person to give you, like, hang out with Raul for a week, and then we'll ease you off him, and, we don't.
That'd be kind of nice, though, right?
So,
there you go. That's what Tinder's for.
There is Tinder.
We'll talk about that later. Everybody.
But to me, the way this manifests most commonly is, well, we can just be friends. We'll just stay in touch as friends. And no. They are not in love with you. You are in love with them. Of course, they can be friends with you. They liked you well enough to be in a relationship with you. There's no reason they shouldn't. You cannot be friends with them when you're withdrawing from them, when you're still in love with them, when it hurts that much. Because you cannot. So you have to have no contact as much as possible and get over it. And once you're over it, then you can evaluate whether you want to be friends, and the vast majority of people go, no, at this point. So I am for the cold turkey, because I think at some point you've asked the questions you need to ask, you've gotten whatever answers you've gotten. There's no good that comes of it except reminding you, except drawing you back in. I used to be a smoker literally decades ago, I can say. And ex-smokers know that it can be 30 years. You have one drag of a cigarette and you'll start craving nicotine. So, cold turkey.
So I'll have two quick questions. The first one is, it is known in psychology that our lives are built with habits. And so in order to get rid of a habit, it needs to be replaced by another habit. We cannot leave that space empty, otherwise we'll go back to that old habit. But unfortunately, love life becomes several habits. And how do we replace that life full with habits? And that's something that I guess everybody here struggles with. Is there anything that you can help us with? And The second question is, you said time is only one of the tools to heal. What are the other tools?
Okay. First question, the habits. So it's a really, really good question, because therein is the difficulty of the recovery. Your life with that person is full of dozens of habits. The habit of what you do in the morning, the habit of how you do this, how you do that, when you say this, when you do that. And all of that is now gone. And so you're right. If you want to recover, you need to actually be mindful of all those habits. And what's my replacement habit now? We used to sit together on the terrace and have coffee every morning. Do I want to still keep doing that? Or I was actually missing the news, I'd rather see the news. To me, if you can ask yourself that question and say, here are all the habits of the relationship. What am I doing now that I'm no longer in it? Let me find the habit that works best for me. Some of them might be the same. I might sit on a terrace and have coffee. I might do something different. But for me, if you are asking yourself that question and trying to come up with answers, there are the tools of recovery. It's exactly that. You're completely right. You can't just leave it. You need to be mindful. Steer the ship. Don't just let it go. Well, what's the best habit for me in the morning? We had this great thing at noon. We would text each other at lunch. I like the idea of texting somebody at lunch. Who else can I text? What friend can I say, hey, do you mind if we text each other? Give thought to all of that, and that's exactly the work of healing, because it's work. You know, if you go to physical therapy, if you had an injury, it hurts, it's work, it's time-consuming, it's laborious, and it's effortful. Same deal with emotional recovery. Time-consuming, effortful, but you will recover more quickly. Question one. Question two was the tools, right? You said, you know, so time is one and social support is another. What are the other tools? Well, there are many, but here's an example of one that you just gave in your first question. To identify the voids that remain after the end of the relationship or the loss. Identify the voids and give very careful thought to how to fill them, to what to do instead, to not just leave them as a void, because that'll hurt more. So how can I substitute? How can I fill that in? How can I do something else instead? Is another very important tool.
So my question kind of builds off those first two, actually. I'm kind of wondering what is the harm or the value for people that seek immediate replacement, whether it's they're going to the bar or the local animal shelter, depending on your situation.
Let's separate out the romantic from the pet loss in this one. Animal lovers might feel very bereft from the loss of a pet. They will not be able to resist the adorableness or the cuteness or the loveness of the new pet. So I don't think it's a problem necessarily to bring in a new pet, even very early on, because even if you're not quite emotionally ready, animals are really good at getting us smitten. So I trust animals to do their part and help you like fall in love again with them. But I just think that's true. You know, if you're not an animal lover, you're not getting the first pet or the second pet. So, but if you are, I think that can work pretty well, in fact. Some people feel very guilty. Well, you know, Fluffy has only been gone a week. How can I bring someone else in? You gave Fluffy an amazing life. There's very little you have to feel guilty about. You gave Fluffy an amazing life. So if there's Fluffy number 2 that you can give an amazing life to, go at it. With romance, it kind of depends. If you're, you know, like I worked with somebody a couple of weeks ago who decided, I'm ready to go on my first date. And he went to the first date, and about 15 minutes in, started talking about his ex. Like he literally said, there was this monster in me that got me just, and I said, don't say that, don't, and suddenly, and he said, my date within 5 minutes was doing this, from this to this to this. And she literally she made it such a horrific excuse. I mean, it was such a poor excuse, but it was obviously like, I'm so leaving. It was too soon for him. He couldn't contain what he was feeling. That's too soon. Maybe it's not too soon to swipe Tinder and go, when I'm ready, that person over there might be interesting. It might not be too soon to even just say, oh, let me read this profile on OkCupid or Match.com, and yeah, these are qualities that I kind of like. Maybe that's something I can look into, and you know what? I'm feeling kind of curious to meet this person, then you're ready. To fall in love, I don't know, but to meet them, yes. So it's a very individual question. I also believe in the scientific method, i.e. trial and error. You can try. If the date is horrific, because of you, you're not ready. Hopefully you can tell that the date was horrific because of you rather than circumstance. But try. You know, if you feel like, I'm just, you know, then you're not ready, but try.
That was really interesting because I think that what you're getting at, really, it's about choices, right? So even in the middle of our emotional distress, it is still a choice on whether we choose to heal ourselves or whether we choose to sit there and wallow in it. And you can wallow for a little bit, right? I mean, no one's going to harp at you for wallowing for a while. But it really is your choice to make the right decisions to heal from there.
And why that's so important for me is because most people aren't aware they have that choice, right? And please be aware that you have a choice of any kind of emotional pain you're going through, for whatever reason. It doesn't have to be heartbreak. You have a choice about whether you're just going to let that go on or whether you're going to, you know, take the wheel and decide, I need to figure out how to make this better. Let me get informed. Let me try this. Let me try that. Let me be actively try to get better. You know, when we get sick, we might have cancer, we might have this, we might have that. We'll go to all kinds of lengths. We'll try this treatment, that treatment. The same approach. Try whatever you need to try. Look things up. Read. Get informed. But don't just passively accept the pain and say, well, I'll feel better in time. You will, but a long time. Too much time. Take control.
Yes, first of all, I just want to say thank you, Mr. Winch, for coming to Louisville and visiting us. We appreciate it very much. And I just want to talk about the emotional heartbreak of breaking up with someone. I found a little secret weapon or tool myself, and this is it. If it helps anybody else, I hope it will. But my thought is, if you don't want me, I don't want you. So, you know, it just kind of gives you a little strength after you've let yourself feel the pain. And I really look forward to reading your books. So, thank you again.
I'm actually going to respond. I know that wasn't a question per se, but I'm going to pretend it was because I do have something to say about it. Your little trick is really good. In the book, I talk about that in a slightly different way. And that is that the you don't want me will fine, I don't want you. Specifically what that means to me, and maybe that's not what you intended, but what that means to me is you'll think of the person then, and you'll focus on their faults perhaps. And you know, here are the ways you weren't perfect for me. Here are the sacrifices I had to make to be with you. Here are the compromises I made which I wasn't thrilled about. Here are all the people you didn't like. You really didn't even like my mother that much. And I think that's useful. In other words, your mind will try and get you to think, you know, your mind will show you these images like, you know, with soft lens and candles in the background whenever you imagine them. And no, they were also, they sat on a toilet, you know what I mean? You have to remember them, and not in all the glory necessarily. And that's the, you know what, I don't want you either. That is a version of that. So I agree with that assumption. I do think it's a good trick.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because my mother-in-law actually said that one time. She said, once someone passes, or if you have a breakup or something like that, everyone's suddenly a saint, right? Anyone that is out of your life and it wasn't by your choosing, they were a saint, your life will never be the same, you're done, and it's all over. When really, it's that fogginess that we see, right? And until the fog lifts, then we can actually tell that Tommy
And we can help the fog lift by focusing on the fact that, oh, I love this person so much, I'm so upset that I lost them. But there were moments there with them that I didn't like. And it's important to remember both. Even in grief of a first-degree relative, like, yeah, I'm going to miss that person so much, but there were aspects which I have to remember as well.
So my question is about the loss of a pet, and it's a little twofold. First part is, how do you process the loss of a pet and when you're prepared for a new one, when you have to take someone else's feelings into consideration?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear. Could you just repeat that? How do you process the loss of a pet?
So I'm married. Obviously, if I lose one of my dogs, it's not just me who's mourning that loss, it's also my husband's. So how do you sort of balance your needs, say if one person is ready faster than another, what tools do you suggest to sort of get on the same page on that?
So you're saying, just to make sure I understand the question, so you lost your pet, you're feeling it, your husband is feeling it, but slightly differently.
Well, we haven't lost them yet, but they're both 8, so we're kind of gearing up for it.
I'm sorry, I'm not hearing
Both
that.
of our dogs are 8 years old, so we're kind of gearing up for the loss.
So you have one, he has one, you lost yours, etc. Look, communication. In other words, be very clear to communicate on, this is how I'm feeling, this is what's helpful, this is what's not, please check in with me here, you don't need to check in with me there. Really, you just need to communicate together as much as possible. You communicate with him about what your needs are, what he's doing that's useful, what he's doing that's not. You know what I mean?
And then, so the second part of that is, we foster dogs. Do you have suggestions for like how to sort of prevent that loss that you feel, like when we send a foster dog to a new home, obviously it's a wonderful event, but it's still a loss for us. So how do you sort of suggest dealing with that when the loss is good?
It's tricky with the fostering. Most people I know who foster animals try to do it as serially as possible for that reason. Because, yeah, you spend a month sometimes with a dog and you're actually helping them in the first, or a cat, you know, you're really and then you give them up all the time. It's very difficult, in fact. So it's easier when you give them in on the Sunday and you know that you have a week, but then the next animal's coming down the pike to be fostered later on. You can also, if you can, when you're fostering and you know it's time limited, try and avoid getting too attached.
Yeah, that doesn't always work.
It's very difficult. It's very difficult, but fostering is difficult work because you have to give them up all the time.
Yeah.
And after not that long, so I know it's difficult.
Hi, I'm a veterinarian here in town, and I was just wondering, we have the loss of pets that are sometimes unexpected, and I think those present their own challenges, but more often I think we kind of are expecting the loss of pets. Owners anticipate that event and know that it's coming. What can we do from our side of things, or are there any tools that you've identified that we can help give to our clients to help them grieve better and quicker and mend their broken hearts faster, you know, just from our side of the profession?
And I missed the beginning. You're saying you work for a vet?
I am a vet.
You are a vet. Well, even better. Look, bring it up, because, you know, just by saying, hey, I'm so sorry, but you need to be aware that this might hit you really hard. You need to be aware that some of us, you know, in society, the feeling is it's just an animal, you should get over it, when for many people that's not the case at all. So if you're feeling that this is hitting you really hard, you are normal, you are an animal lover, and be aware that there's a grieving process. Use the term, there is a grieving process you will go through. And I would suggest, you know, if you have a bunch of clients that can have a support group, you know, that can have a Facebook group to discuss these things. You can create one, you know, or have your Facebook page as a vet, one in which people can talk about these dynamics. But as a vet, if you acknowledge this is emotionally very challenging, there's a grieving process involved, that alone will make people feel like, oh good, because you're the doctor, so you telling them that will make them feel like it's okay that I feel this way. And to me, that alone would be a great service.
Hi, thanks for being here. Whoa, that's loud. Thanks for being here. And I just want to mention, just like what helped her, there is a divorce group in Crescent Hill that's amazing. And you don't have to be married, you can just be a relationship. But it's an incredible support group that one of the things they said is we never get tired of talking about this. So I encourage that if you are in the middle of any of that. And second of all, I think it's very interesting, the dichotomy of these two subjects, one with pets and one with humans. One, because I think with a human it's conditional, right? There's a lot of dynamic there. With a pet, I feel like it's unconditional. So they only want to be there. So I think it's kind of almost heavier with the pet, because all they wanted to do was to be with you and to be, you know, please you and to accept you for who you are, because you provide for their needs. So I guess my question is, in both of those instances, which I think it's a little easier to get another pet, but at the same time, how do you remain autonomous and still have given yourself liberty to have feelings, so to speak?
Okay, I missed the question. How do you remain, what was the word?
Autonomous. So like you're trying not to, because everybody says now, like, oh, you just need to find it for yourself. You need to find joy for yourself and know who you are before you involve another individual. So how do you stay true to yourself and still let somebody in, per se?
So any kind of grief, it's a great question, any kind of grief impacts our sense of who we are, our sense of identity. Because as I said, the guy with the dog, Bova's dad, he was no longer Bova's dad. When we're in a relationship, we use the we pronoun, and there's actually research about couples who do use we and couples who don't, and you can make a guess about which couples tend to have happier relationships, the ones that do, and just in case you're not guessing. So those questions about, well, who am I now that I'm no longer in this relationship? Who am I now that I'm not spending so many hours, you know, with my pet? Is a question you have to ask and answer. But if you've been in a relationship for 6 months, it might be easier to answer than if you've been in one for 6 years. Because then you've had a lot of time where you were not a single person. And now, well, you might not be the same single person you were before. It might be about reinvention. And you won't quite know that until you spend a real amount of time thinking about that question. Well, who am I now? want my life to be about? What do I want me to be about? These are questions we actually have to ask ourselves. And most people think, well, that's what you go to therapy for. And I'm like, no, you can ask yourself questions without going to therapy, for goodness sakes. And so ask yourself the questions repeatedly. Work through the answers. It's not an immediate answer. It's like, maybe this, maybe that. How do I feel about this? How does that make me feel? But yeah, reconstituting your life is the task after grief, or in the processing of grief.
On the radio the other day, I heard someone say that men are not given cultural permission to deal with their inner lives. Do you think that men suffer worse or at have a greater mountain to climb because we tend to not have a social safety net?
You're saying, do men have, I just want to make sure I understand the question, that men don't have permission, don't have
permission to deal with our inner lives, our emotional traumas.
Yeah,
so do you think we suffer more for not having a social net that I feel that women tend to have more of?
I think the problem happens not in the suffering, but in the recovery. In other words, we bleed the same internally, emotionally, as women do. On average, and this is a whopping generalization, so forgive me, on average, women have more emotional tools than men do. They're more adept at talking about feelings and dealing with feelings, on average, than men are. So the difference is going to happen in the recovery, because they're going to get together and talk with their friends, and men are going to be like, let's just shoot some hoops and never mention it again. And might work for some, but might not work for other people. So before we end, I really would like to thank you, A, for coming. I know it's been a tricky weekend with the flooding and all, but A, for coming, and B, for being very open and asking questions, and because sometimes I talk about emotions, and you know, the times for question, everyone's like, I don't have emotions, I don't know what you're talking about. So I'm really glad, so thank you very much.